Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Wild from ProWritingAid. Thank you for joining us for another session in the ProWritingAid Ask a Book Doctor series. My guest for all of these sessions is the fantastic Sally OJ. How are you doing tonight, Sally?
I'm doing great, Tom. Thank you. I have forgotten to put in my fancy schmancy flash camera. So I'm afraid you're probably getting a very pixelated version of me tonight, but I'm sure you can cope.
Sal, you look fantastic. That's all I need to say.
Yes,
we have
things.
I've noticed we have quite a contrast. I've got a new laptop and I'm not sure what's going on with the color, if it's the laptop or the camera, but I seem to be very, very orange for some reason. I'm not naturally this color. I don't know if it's the lighting or whatever, but anyway. Yeah, lovely to see you again, Sal. That was a close one, that was. I don't
You pulled it off.
Back close, but we are here and we're live. And tonight, Sal, we're talking about autobiographical fiction, which is a really interesting topic. I think I'm, certainly no expert on the subject. I think we'd really appreciate everybody's questions on this and thoughts on this, perhaps even letting us know your favorite autobiographical piece of autobiographical fiction. But Sal, let's start off just by talking a little bit about what exactly we mean by autobiographical fiction.
Autobiographical fiction is when you write about your life, but you fictionalize it. It is, there's an advert in this country, I don't know if it's how many countries it's in, it's just what it says on the tin. It is exactly what it says. And most people will have read and thoroughly enjoyed autobiographical fiction, whether they've realized what it was or not. All Jack Kerouac's books are autobiographical fiction, all exactly the story of his life. He just wrote what happened to him and his friends. Admittedly, they had quite a lively and exciting life for that period, but he changed names, he changed a few little details, but it was all what happened to him. Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar is another very good example. The example I tend to use always, which I'm always surprised, I used to think it was a very niche book, but everyone seems to have read it. It's a very good, very funny little book, is Heartburn by Nora Ephron.
Has anybody read Heartburn? I'm interested to know, but you introduced me to this, Sal, and I've already started reading it. It's fantastic.
Have you? I'm so glad. It's so funny. Well, Nora Ephron is probably best known now for she's wrote Sleepless in Seattle and When Harry Met Sally, and she directed Julia and what's it called? The one about the cook, Childs, Julia Childs, Julia and Julia. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, she wrote and directed that.
Someone help us out here.
Yes, please. Thank
Julia
you, Julia. How hard was that, really? So she wrote and directed all those films, and she was, I think, a screenwriter before that. But before that, she was a journalist, and she was quite a well-known journalist in the States because she wrote sort of commentaries on things. And her first real breakthrough was a piece she wrote about being flat-chested, and that got syndicated all over everywhere, and that was in the early 70s. So she was quite well known, and she married Carl Bernstein, who was one of the journalists in the Watergate scandal, as recorded in All the President's Men. So they had a good life, and they were living in Washington or shuttling between Washington and New York. And she had one little boy, and she was pregnant with another baby, and he left her for somebody. And she wrote an extremely funny but quite poignant and very spot on chronicle of this event, of what led up to him leaving and how she perceived it and what was actually going on and what happened. And it's a beautiful little book, and it was made into a not very good film with Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep. And it is the perfect example of really good autobiographical fiction, because it's completely fictionalized in as much as her character is a chef, his character is a journalist, but a completely different kind of journalist. They are living in Washington, but it's all you know, but anyone who reads it knows exactly who it is, knows exactly what's going on. And it's changed enough that it's definitely fiction, but it's enough the same so you know exactly that this is the story of what Carl Burns did to her.
The fiction element there is to protect her from being kind of sued or defamation?
Well, I think there were several elements to it. And, you know, I tried to do, because I knew we were doing this, I tried to do a bit of research. I know he sort of made a half-hearted attempt to begin to sue her and then sort of didn't, and then they made some kind of accord, and he had, but I mean, this is one of the things about autobiographical fiction. There are many different reasons that people chose to do it. Kerouac wanted to be a novelist.
Yeah.
And he wanted to write novels, and he took his life as inspiration as his novels. He just didn't stray very far at all from what actually had happened. He didn't want to write biography. He wanted to write a novelist. Wanted to write a novel. I'm sorry, I'm completely incoherent tonight.
Sorry, I've just added captioning because I forgot to turn it on, just in case you're distracted.
That's fine. But yes, people do it because they want to avoid getting sued. If they do that, they really have to go quite far with the fiction element, but you know, and there's ways of getting around it. I think if you're writing autobiographical fiction, you can do it in certain ways which sort of protects you. I mean, even in biography, sometimes people just put at the front of their book, this is how I remembered everything. This is how I remember everything. So if everyone else remembers it differently, I'm sorry, but this is how I remember it. And that actually covers them mostly. It depends how libelous they get.
On that point, you've got to find quite a fine line between autobiography or biography and autobiographical fiction, right? It can be down to a case of changing a few names and a few details.
It can really be down to a case of changing a few names. You know, there's a book that I have worked on, which is a beautiful mixture, which is autobiographical fiction, which is a beautiful mixture of made up names and real names. You know, if it's done deftly and well, to help sort of orient the reader. And you know, Jack Kerouac does that as well to a small degree. He does that with musicians. He puts their real names in and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's just sometimes because people don't want to spill all their beans all over the place, and they want to write about something, but they want it not as obviously their story. And you know what? I think people are going to tell us 100 different reasons tonight why they've chosen to do it. I would be very interested to hear. And the last reason, of course, it won't be the last reason, there'll be many more. Another reason, of course, is because it allows you that bit of leeway, and it allows you, that Kerouac is another good example of this. He sometimes changed things about a bit to make them more readable or more funny or more interesting, and it was fiction, so he could do that. But it does allow you to condense things. Like if you were writing your autobiography and perhaps a lot of things happened that were quite similar, and it would have taken you chapters and chapters and chapters, you can condense that into one chapter. You can make several characters into one character. This is very common in autobiographical fiction, or you can do it the other way. You can split one character into several characters. So there are many, many reasons people choose to do it. And it is actually an extremely good genre. I don't know how, it's a very well-respected genre. It's a very rewarding genre to read, usually. Very satisfying because people know what they're writing about. It's often very entertaining.
Is it a common genre, would you say, for first-time writers? Or is it more of a genre that people discover and enter, you know, once they, later on in their careers? I'm not sure if I'm making real sense on that.
All the authors here will know that you write a book because you've got a story to tell.
Yeah.
And it's knocking on the inside of your head and it wants out.
Yeah.
And there's very little you can do about that. You're just stuck with it and you have to write the story, and it's agony and it's terrible and it's awful. And let's not pretend writing it's fun. It's just dreadful, but it's very rewarding and wonderful at the same time. So if you've got a story knocking on your head and it's your first book, but it is, you want to tell the story. A lot of people, if they're telling stories of their childhoods, make it into fiction because it just is easier to deal with everything in that way. A lot of people who want to deal with something very traumatic in their lives, like Nora Ephron, who wrote about her very, very painful period in her life, but makes it funny and interesting and accessible, as well as very poignant. So there's many reasons that people might choose to write their first book like that.
There's a couple of quotes I'd found earlier when I was looking at around the subject, Sal, and a couple that really stuck with me. One is that this will probably resonate with people tonight. Creative writers love to break conventions and bend genres, and autobiographical fiction is a great hybrid of creative non-fiction and fiction. And then the other one was, so to offer a simple definition, autobiographical fiction is any work of fiction that is based on real life events of the author. Autobiographical fiction is based on fact, but importantly, not bound by fact, which I think is quite a good distinction.
I think that's an excellent distinction, and it's quite a skill. You know, people might erroneously think, oh, you're just writing about yourself. Off you go. And it's hard to pull it off. It's hard to get the balance right. It's hard to not be. When you're writing autobiographical fiction, it's very hard to remember. Well, it's always hard to do this. It's something I'm always talking to authors about, but it's to think of your reader. So you've really got to think, you know, the bit where the dog bit you and the pickle spilt, and, you know, that might have been a terribly important turning point in your life, but it's got to, if you're fictionalizing the book, you've got to make it entertaining. You've got to think, well, what do I, actually, I'm not going to write about the dog and the pickles because it's pretty boring when I put it on the page, but what was that moment? What was that moment? Why was it so important to me? How can I get it across? How can I get across that moment in a way that it is going to be accessible and show the reader what I was really feeling? So that's one of the great things you can do with this genre, is you can think, oh, well, I'm not going to write what actually happened because for whatever reason, but what can I do to really get that across?
And do you ever, I mean, so you've worked on some, lots of really interesting books, Sal. Do you ever have someone that actually comes to you with what originally is a biography, but actually ends up becoming a work of kind of biographical fiction? So they introduce it, or, is it something that, do they come to you with an idea that they want to embellish elements of their life, or what? How's it worked?
I haven't actually had that. I have worked on biography, as people may know.
Velveteen.
I have worked on autobiographical fiction, which is not published yet, but which I anticipate will be published quite shortly. Well, be in the process of being published quite shortly, I hope. Touching some wood as I speak here. But I've never had anyone do that swerve. Though I think perhaps books have come to me that have been swerved one way or another before they've got to me. Yeah, I think that's possible. And so if what you're asking is, do people actually know, you know what? I think years ago, I mean, really quite a long time ago, I think I did have a biography, which I suggested he fictionalized. And I don't know if he did or not, but that was my suggestion. I said to him, I think this is going to work much better if you keep the story and everything, but don't make it about you. And that was because of what we talked about just now, that he was, he was literally telling us all these big things that had happened to him, but it wasn't working on the page. It wasn't coming across with the oomph that it should have come across. And I knew that if he fictionalized it, it would come across much better. It's telling that I'd forgotten, and it's also telling that he, I think, disappeared. I don't think he came back to me. So either he did it or he didn't. I don't know, but that was my strong recommendation to him.
There are some lovely examples in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for contributing some ideas, some excellent books. Sarah Cox, I think. So some suggestions: The Death in the Family by James Adji, Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs, House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, and some others as well.
All the beat writers
yeah.
had a taste for doing this. Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, let's dive in with a couple of questions. So the first question we had today was, Fear and Loathing, of course. Thank you, Jack. Yeah, wonderful one. So I think this was Michelle who put this first and foremost. First of all, my book is a heavily fictionalized version of my husband's story. Is that biographical fiction? Is there such a genre?
Can you just read that again?
Yes, my book is a heavily fictionalized version of my husband's story. So I'm assuming it's my husband's life story.
Mm-hmm.
Is that biographical fiction? Is there such a genre?
Yes, it is biographical fiction. I mean, and there is such a genre. I mean, that, you know, one that springs to mind is a book called Swan Song by Kelly Jeffcott. Gosh, I can't remember. She's a friend of mine as well. She's not going to be well pleased. I can't remember her last name, but I can't remember anything tonight. Which is about Truman Capote, and it's wonderful fictionalized biography. I mean, there are loads and loads and loads out there. Swan Song came to mind because it's a fantastic book, and I don't feel so terrible. I can't remember her last name, and she is a friend of mine.
You keep talking. I'll do some research, Sal.
Kelly Jeffcott and something else. But yes, that is definitely biographical fiction, and that is also a very huge genre, huge genre. Loads and loads of bud. No, I'm not talking.
Yeah, Kelly Greenberg Jeffcott.
Greenberg Jeffcott.
Greenberg Jeffcott. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Kelly. But the book is fantastic, and everyone should read it. I did not think I was interested in Truman Capote at all, and I could not put the book down. I was absolutely gripped by it. So,
interesting.
A good. And of course, Truman Capote himself wrote a biographical fiction. Was In Cold Blood?
I was thinking that. I think it's the only one I've read.
Fictionalized. I think I've never read it because it's so gory, but I think it might have been fictionalized. Yes. So, you know, and on it goes. It's a virtuous circle.
This is an interesting question, and thank you for this. My book is written as a memoir, but due to family objections, need to do something else. How do I make the shift?
Well, this is something you've got to be very careful of. And with that, I would suggest, well, you do whatever. I mean, you know, how many books out there are actually real life that are fiction? You know, probably a huge amount of them certainly have an element of biography to them, or an element of things. You know, I have worked with authors, and I've said that, you know, I think you should change this, and they said to me, no, it really happened, and this is just fiction. They've said it happened to me, it really happened to me, whereby I have often said, well, it still doesn't work, so you're going to have to change it. So if your family are agitated and you've got no choice really but to make it fiction, to fictionalize it as much as you can, but to use what happened to you, they're still going to get mad at you.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's going to be very difficult to disguise the story in its entirety, isn't it? But
there's really nothing you can do. And this is a serious problem that authors had. You know, I spoke last time about the fact that authors, you know, a thing that's not spoken about enough is how authors' partners often aren't very supportive of their writing. But it goes to the wider family as well. And it goes to people becoming very, especially if real life things are included in a book, you'll get every single member of your family telling you it didn't happen like that. I didn't say that. This isn't what happened. And it can generate quite bad feeling. I don't really know what the answer is, because it's what I said. If you've got this story tapping in your head and it's got to come out, it's got to come out. But somewhere along the line, you have to make the decision about being sensitive to your family's needs or just writing your book. And it can be hard. I mean, Viv's book is a very good example of that.
I like Isabel's suggestion, which is don't invite them to the launch. I'm not sure if that'll give you complete protection, but anyway, it's a good idea. Okay, can I just a quick reminder to keep posting questions, please, in the Q&A, so I can keep focus on one element. And on that, we'll have a look at a couple of others. So, there's some kind of high-level ones here around. So Victory Joe asks, is autobiographical fiction labelled as such, or is it listed under other genres?
No, it's usually labelled as such. It is a genre. It's a big burgeoning, very popular genre. Yeah. And again, people often don't realise that what they're reading is autobiographical fiction. That's true. And it's often put just in fiction. If you're in a small bookshop and they can't have, or even in a big bookshop, you know, they'll often get put into fiction, but it is a recognised and respected genre, yes. And
that's the important thing I think here about it being a respected genre. I think, you know, some people don't realise that. Victory Joe goes on to say, what if you want to write an autobiographical fiction but don't want to say that's what it is? How would you recommend accomplishing that? Well, I wouldn't necessarily go down that route. I mean, you should be kind of proud that it is autobiographical fiction, right?
People do it all the time.
Right.
I mean, this is what I said earlier on. I'm sure we read fiction, what we think is fiction all the time, which is in fact not fiction at all. And I get this with books that I work on. Yeah. I think I'm reading fiction, and then I say, I think you should change this around, or I think you shouldn't do this, or you should change that. And they say, no, it's what happened. Oh. So I think it's you have to sort of take it down level by level, and the bottom level is the people who are in the book. So it doesn't matter until you get to the people who are in the book, and then you have to make your decision, as what we were just saying. And you know, many people would say it's your story, you must tell it if you want to. A lot of people say, I couldn't write this until my father died, or I couldn't write this until my grandmother died, or whatever. Or, you know, if any of you have read Viv Albertine's books, they are brutal to certain members of her family, absolutely brutal, and she made that decision. And some of them have passed, but some of them haven't. And she made that decision. She really wanted to tell her story, and she has told her story, and they are fantastic books, but she chose to go down that route. And it's not always an easy choice to go down.
Yeah, but it's a considered choice, isn't it? It's something you have to give clear consideration to understand what the consequences are going to be. And that, you know, in that situation, as in the situation from the question this evening, I think it sounds like, you know, that's not always an easy decision to make. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of other questions. So again, I mean, related one from Rick here. Do you promote or tell the reader this is a work of biographical fiction? And if not, how do people know it's biographical fiction? Well,
biographical or autobiographical?
Well,
biographical.
Rick's referring to biographical. If
it's biographical fiction, the person is usually named. If you're writing like in Swan Song, it's about Truman Capote. There's no ambiguity about it. If you're writing biographical fiction, and what your leeway is, yes, I've taken Greta Garbo as my subject, but I'm just making this up. This is fiction. This isn't really her life, or it is her life, but I've imagined what happened. So, you know, you're not writing a straight up biography, you're writing fiction. And that's why you say autobiographical fiction. It's very often because, as with Heartburn, as with all of Jack Kerouac's works, the reader knows perfectly well who they're reading about. They're not supposed to think it's just made up characters. They know perfectly well who the characters are. And that's part of the fun. That is part of the fun of sort of working out, you know, the book that I've been working on recently, as you know, part of the fun of it is people are going to go, oh, I know, I just realized who that is. Yeah. You know, that's part of the joy of it. So autobiographical fiction isn't usually meant to deceive anyone.
I'm looking forward to when that gets published, Sal, and you can finally tell us all about it.
I'm looking forward to that too.
No spoilers. Yeah, Rick has just clarified that they did mean autobiographical fiction for that particular question. Okay, so next question.
Can I just, Tom, remind people that I can't see the questions or anything?
Yes.
I can't see the questions or chat, except very occasionally when they just pop up really randomly. But mainly, I can't see anything.
And that's a deliberate thing, because you end up getting distracted. So we keep
Yes, I turn it off. I turn it off so I don't get distracted. Yeah.
So, do you think that if a story has too much tragedy or depressing content, that it should be lightened up? I worry that the content might be too much of a downer, although it ends well.
Surely everyone here knows of one of the most popular genres of the past 20 odd years, which is called misery memoir. People love the tragedy and the, I mean, some of, have you never heard of misery memoir?
I've never heard of misery memoir, no.
It is a huge, very successful genre, and it's mostly not fiction. It's mostly just biography, although I think actually it is sometimes fiction, actually fictionalized either by another writer or by the person that it happened to, and especially things about appalling childhoods are terribly popular. People like reading about that stuff. A lot of people like reading about that stuff, and especially if there's a happy ending. I think it's sort of like it's like people who want to watch films that make them cry. You know, it's like an emotional release.
Yeah. So
it depends how thick you lay it on, depends how awful it is, depends on lots of things, but you would presumably some point in the process have a good editor who would tell you, you know, guide you a little.
Yeah.
Or an agent who would guide you a little, whatever. So especially if there's a happy ending, no, go for it.
I think so. Okay, one more question. Okay, so what is the difference between biographical fiction, that's not autobiographical, so biographical fiction, and stories that are inspired by real events, as you often see in movies?
Well, it is exactly that. Biographical fiction is talking, and I'll go back to Swan Song, which is a fictionalized account of period in Truman Capote's life, the last years of his life. Actually, it goes back to his childhood and everything as well, but it focuses primarily on the last years of his life. It's about Truman Capote. It mentions Truman Capote. It mentions everyone in his life by name. Well, it does more than mention him. It's about him. So it's not fiction. But it is fiction. It's using the person. It's using their life, but it's being written as a fiction book. Remind me of the rest of the question. I'm so sorry. It wouldn't be one of these.
The difference between fiction, so biographical fiction, and stories that are inspired by real events, as you often see in movies.
Stories that are inspired by real events are basically novels.
Yeah.
And you'll see at the beginning, this was inspired by. But, you know, inspired by can cover so many different, you know, things. It can literally be inspired by a piece I saw in the news, and that made me think about, you know, what happened next, you know, or it made me think about who those people were, what their lives had been really like. Or it can be, you know, a whole of huge event. It could be, you know, inspired by 9/11. It could be inspired by the Russian Revolution. It can be inspired. So it can be huge world-changing events, or it can be the smallest thing, inspired by a poem I read.
Yeah,
that has always stuck with me. I've seen that before. And so you take your inspiration and you go where it leads you.
We've covered this a little bit before, Sal, but I can see there's lots of chat about it this evening, about the point about having to ask permission. So should you be asking, if you are covering a story that includes real characters, is there any requirement for you to ask permission?
So we slide back for a second to fan fiction, where people just write the disclaimer at the beginning. Of course, those aren't real people, but you're using other people's characters. So the way people get around it in fan fiction is to put this disclaimer at the beginning saying, obviously, I didn't invent these characters, just Whedon did, J.K. Rowling did, you know, whoever. With real people and real life, it depends how far back it goes for a start. I think if there are living, if it's living people or people who are living who knew that person, you're stepping onto much less firm ground. But there are a variety of disclaimers, and it just, again, it depends how sensitive you want to be. It really comes down. I mean, of course, there are things that you're going to get completely, somebody's going to try and sue you for. If you claim somebody murdered somebody, if you claim somebody raped somebody, if you claim somebody abused somebody, and you do it boldly and clearly, that somebody is not going to be very happy with you. Though sometimes, you know, people don't sue because they don't want to give oxygen to this, to the story, to the book. Sometimes it you know, conflates the whole thing more. Libel laws are very, very complex, very, very complex. And there are ways of dancing around them, and there are ways of walking straight into them as if they're a big bear trap. And disclaimers can do a lot. As I said, you know, Viv in her books is very, very, nobody murders anyone, but she's very direct about a lot of things that have happened to her. And she just says at the beginning of the book, this is how I remembered it. This is how I remember what happened. And if other people remember it differently, and as far as I'm aware, there was no legal rumbling. But then people do just have to decide, am I going to make a fuss about this and draw even more people's attention to it? Or am I going to have to? So I think the simple answer is write your book. Put any kind of disclaimer you want to at the beginning of it. Decide whether you want to be estranged from your family for the rest of your life or not, or your friends or whoever else is in it. Or if you think they'll be fine. Write your book. If it's good enough to get an agent, that's when you have this conversation.
That's a great piece of advice, really. Yeah, worry about that at that point. I'd just like a quick mention, Jack, I really like your comment. Tragedy plus time equals comedy. That's what we say on the stand-up circuit anyway.
That's absolutely right. That's exactly right. And a good book plus time equals not getting sued. You know, it's the same. It's exactly the same principle. Yes. But I think people very rarely do get. I mean, if we all think about it, how many times can we remember hearing that an author's been sued? It's people get sued much more for plagiarism. I mean, this is nothing to do with what we're talking about. That I can think of several instances, and I'm sure we all can. But just simply trashing somebody.
I think your advice really, I think it's great, Sal. The fact is, by the time you have an agent or publisher, they should be able to guide you on that. Worry about that at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, if an agent's picked it up, they obviously think it's got legs, so they will. But you know, certainly in the old days, books went through a legal team. In this kind of book, nowadays, I'm horrified, and I'm completely guessing. I think they might expect you to pay for your own lawyer to have a look at it. But you know, more and more publishers push these costs back onto the author, unfortunately.
Yes. Now. Yeah.
But
okay,
it would be a risky business to if you're thinking of self-publishing, it might be worth investing in a bit of legal, at least talking to a lawyer about it.
Yeah, so related to that, the last question, we've just answered that. Thank you. So, that's great. Now, a scandalous lawsuit could be a publicity bonanza. Exactly right. So,
and I think this is something that has occurred to many people. I don't think that's not out of the question. It depends on, I mean, we all know books that have flourished because of.
Well, this is exactly the story of Heartburn behind the scenes, wasn't it? With Carl Bernstein. From what I read, he negotiated rights
to the film.
Well, not so much to the film, but actually to kind of, I can't remember what the wording was, but somehow he had approval of the book or the film. I can't remember which it was. I think that was how he, how Nora avoided being sued, I guess. I'm not sure. It seemed to be there was he had some control over the
It occurs to me that he perhaps should not have left her when she was 8 months pregnant, and then the book wouldn't have been written.
Well, indeed, there is that.
Just my own personal opinion.
Yeah. So it's definitely
no one deserves to have their life hung out to dry if they don't want to. I that was a joke, because even if people do despicable things, it's that they still have a right to their own privacy. They do, unfortunately. I believe, anyway.
Okay, so look, we're coming to the end. We need to finish a few minutes early this evening, but I just wondered if there are any more questions. We do have a couple of minutes, so do ask them. The last one that's come in is just, how is this different with visionary fiction as a genre? I'm not familiar with visionary fiction, so I don't know if you can answer that, Sal.
I'm also not familiar with visionary fiction.
Okay, so we'll have to
well, can someone explain?
Have to make a note. Anyone that can help with visionary fiction, then we'd love to hear. Other than that, any other last tips or suggestions, Sal? We've covered, I think we've covered quite a lot in our 45 minutes.
I would love a couple more questions if we can do that.
Okay, so let's see. We've also had some great suggestions of books to read. So An Embroidered Life was one of the ones. Yeah, Anne Lamott, a great author. Tell the Truth by Hemingway, yes, of course. Oh yeah, and then somebody's actually quoted Anne Lamott, which is great. But I think we may have answered all questions today, Sal. So, here we go. Next, thank you. Next hang on. Next chapter editing. Here we go. Visionary fiction is a fiction genre with new age or mind, body, spirit themes and perspectives, including consciousness, expansion, spirituality, mysticism, and parapsychology. It is sometimes classed as a subtype of speculative fiction.
So there you go. It's again pretty much what it does on the tin. And there was the question: is that autobiographical? Yes, it can. Well, it depends. I know somebody who writes books about his experience astral projecting, which are, whether you think that actually happens or not, that's what he writes his books about, and he certainly absolutely believes them. But that's not fiction, that's just biographical or autobiographical. But yes, I mean, basically anything that's based on your own experience, anything, any genre, even science fiction. So one would hope that wouldn't be too much based on your own experience. Right, extraordinarily, a question has just come up that I have seen, and it's a really silly one. I mean, my fault that it's silly. Somebody just said, it just was there for a second. It just comes up for a second. What do I mean by on the tin?
Yeah, that was what I was going to end on, Sal. Come on.
Okay.
What do you mean
so in this country, I sort of assumed it's been such a successful advertising campaign.
It's Ronseal, isn't it?
It's Ronseal, yes. It's for house for
other wood preservatives are available.
Wood preservatives, exactly. And there's an advert where a man holds up a tin of this product and it says seals wood, stops rain getting in or something. And he says it does exactly what it says on the tin. And that's the advert.
That's it.
And it's so successful that it's been running for years and years and years, and everyone knows it. And it's become, in this country, it's become sort of part of the vernacular. People says, well, it does exactly what it says on the tin.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's what I meant. I sort of assumed it had gone worldwide because it's such a successful campaign that I sort of assumed it got used.
Brilliant.
But my point is, he doesn't say anything else. He just holds it up, shows you what it says, and he says does exactly what it says on the tin.
Yeah, nothing more to add.
And that's it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Sally, a pleasure as always. Thank you ever so much for your insight and your experience. It's always really great to catch up. And I just wanted to, I can't remember what we're doing next month. I should know off the top of my head, but in the panic of getting set up, I've completely forgotten. But we are back next month. That's the main thing. So it'll be the second Tuesday of the month, second Tuesday of February. And we look forward to seeing everybody then.
Can I just say, I'm absolutely thrilled to see so many people here. I really wondered if this was a very niche thing that not many people would be interested in. So it's been such a joy to see everyone here. And as always, it's the questions that make these sessions. That's what makes it all work. So thank you all so much.
Yes.
From a very cold, rainy evening in Brighton. Thank you so much. And we will see you next month.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, wherever you are. Stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you all in February. Sal, go on, last point.
No, I was going to mention the prize, but this probably isn't the place to do it. So
go on, go on quickly. We've still got.
Okay, very quickly, and I know Tom's going to be posting stuff about this. I have been thrilled to be appointed a judge in something called the Cheshire Novel Prize, and it's international. And you can Google it, and it's a really, really great new prize. And I just think people should be aware of it because it's really wonderful. But Tom will be.
I am just going to post the link here. Yeah, it looks fantastic. It's a new prize, isn't it? But it's international.
New prize, international. Everyone gets feedback. Every single person who enters it gets feedback, and some really great judges and me. And I'm so thrilled and honoured to be part of it. I really am. And yeah. Spread the word. Spread the word.
Awesome. That's fantastic, Sal. Yeah, and we will be tweeting about that in the next few days. So keep a lookout for that. Okay, that's it from us. Thank you. As Sally said, it's you guys that make these sessions. Everything that goes on in the chat, all of the questions you contribute, we couldn't do it without you. We really look forward to seeing you all in February. And as I said, stay safe until then. Have a lovely rest of the day, and we will see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye.